Workplace well-being. Welcome aboard, everyone. Today we are hosting a podcast for one of those topics which a lot of the organizations pay lip service to. We have two fantastic guests here who are senior leaders who's going to add great value from their personal experience, plus their global expertise that they have evolved to be today in. Our two guests are going to talk about what's their personal experiences, what do they think about it going beyond. And three is if you want to start a meaningful well-being program in your organization, with your family, for yourself, where do you need to start out? I'm Failan Saleem, and we have with us Jo, who comes from an amazing 20-year background, holding current leadership positions in driving leadership and learning across Majid Al Futtaim. She's been there in multiple continents, multiple jobs. She is certified to be positive. Yeah, so we're going to see a lot of those positive vibes coming in. So welcome, Jo. Thank you for joining us today. We have Taimur. It's finally challenging to introduce a person who you work with. And I think Taimur is an action-oriented, living by example leader in mental health and mindfulness. He's never sit down and asked me a question, where are you, what are you up to? And I think that's the key element of being leadership trust, ensuring that your people are valued and respected and managed not by fault finding, but managed by praise and reward. He's been at PwC senior partner at the moment, heading up all the professional qualifications across the region, comes with a portfolio of experiences across upskilling, cross-skilling, and reskilling. Welcome, Taimur.
Thank you very much, Failan.
Okay. So I'd like to pose the first question to Jo. Is well-being, in your perspective, a must-have or a need to have? What do you think?
Yeah, I like this question. Clearly I would say a must-have. And I predominantly work in the space of learning and leadership development. And we have a phrase that we use in the learning community, which is one size fits none. And I would say you can directly correlate that with well-being also. A well-being strategy at a company is non-negotiable. It's a core part of your EVP. But I almost think we need to rename it to well-beings or something, or have a plural in it, because it's so hyper-personal to individuals. And I think whilst it's a non-negotiable in a company, it has to be done in a very specific way that speaks to the unique needs of an individual within a company. So finding approaches and mechanisms that allow people to have well-being on their terms, that matters for them, that matters for their family, and also underpinned by a healthy culture. So no amount of yoga or a wheel of life exercise is going to make up for asking someone to stay in the office until 10 o'clock and miss their kids' school play, miss a social event with their friends in the evening. So you have to really role model it at the most senior levels as well, which can be difficult as a leader when you want to put more hours in than your team. But I think role modeling as a leader your own journey around well-being, around what you do to set healthy boundaries is really important, and encouraging people to do it in ways that's personal for them, and to not just wait on a well-being strategy from a company, but know that if your boundaries become permeable around this, it's a long road to recover. So also owning your own well-being and demanding that your company underpins it with the healthiest culture it can have.
Absolutely. So, going from where you said your employee value proposition, I like what you said about hyper personality, and if I personally don't like sushi or sitting on a beanbag, or if my colleague Nawal, who works with me, doesn't like to go to the gym, although she likes to go to the gym, it's going to hold it against me. That's a valid point about understanding your DNA. Taimur, you've been the head of people at the academy, leading the positivity of all our people, and the academy staff has grown, from the time of like 50, 60 to about 150 plus across the region. So what do you think about the must-have, need to have logic?
I think, see, in a lot of ways, I will resonate what Joe said, and you've already, so don't want to repeat the same thing. I think one thing which I have learned over the years is the power of listening. And as leaders, as people in the people space, and I look at myself in the same lens, that a big part of my role or my job, apart from the commercials, is making sure that we have the right team and a motivated team towards each other, which share the same goal, same culture towards the same commercial end. And for that, listening is very critical and very important. I think we come in sometimes a lot of stereotypes about, for instance, what flexibility means for people, what well-being means for people. And if I reflect back on the way at PwC we have looked at things, is the whole idea of what we call be well, work well, in which the whole well-being is broken down into 6 quadrants. So yes, physical well-being is one of them, but there's also emotional well-being, there's mental well-being, there's social well-being, and there's also financial well-being. And when I use this word financial well-being, sometimes people look at it and say, okay, where did that come from? But the reality is that financial well-being also plays a big part in our actions, in what we do. So my way of looking at things in our organization, and it's not just me, it's the leadership, is looking at it holistically, not focus on just one area, which is many a times come out as being only the mental well-being, but also look at the physical well-being, but also look at the emotional side and social side as well as financial side. So you have to set the goals aligned, listen to people, what motivates them, and if the motivations is beyond a pizza or lunch, and into probably a recognition based way of recognizing people, which we have something like a kudos points, that also helps. So my view would be having a more holistic approach, listening to people, and not just listening. Many times we listen and we don't take an action, and that actually is counterproductive, because then people say you're doing endless surveys without having a result at the end. So listen, act upon what people are asking or expecting, and then look back, and there's a feedback loop in terms of saying what works, what doesn't work. So I keep doing it. It's still a learning process. So that's how I see it. And just to wrap it up, I think many a times the whole well-being should not be seen as a destination. It is a journey. So we need to be on it, and we will have to keep evolving and finding out ways on what's working for our people.
Okay, fantastic, Taimur. So I'm going to footnote the financial well-being, because everybody who's listening to you are going to come back to you on that. Coming from that perspective, now that we've got alignment that it's a need to have, and Joe going, it's non-negotiable,
Yeah,
which
must
I
have.
think
Yes,
is
absolutely.
something, is a very critical point that she made, because this, I think our recruiters also should be looking at in the CV. How is your track record on well-being, your people, what have you been doing with them? Uh, what's your take? The work from home, work as you please, work from anywhere. What's your take on work-life balance from a personal perspective? Yes,
I
Taimur,
go ahead?
that's for
Okay.
you. Yeah.
See, again, one size does not fit all. I think what is very clear is that work life balance starts with flexibility. Now, what flexibility means can be very different for different people. Okay. I know people in my team who would like to come at 9 in the morning or who want to shut off at 5. But I also know people in my business who actually do not want that, and they say, okay, we might want to walk in at 10, 11, and we'll finish at 6, 7, because their circumstances allow them to work like that, and it works for them. So one again is understanding what works for one team might not work for another team. We can't keep having multiple ways of doing work. So what we should focus on is the output, and I think that's one way to look at it. Well-being, if it's not compromising the output, there's nothing wrong with it in terms of how we are managing it. If it is compromising the output and the business outputs are not being met, then we have to look into it and find out what's working, what's not working. Maybe our style of working does not suit what our clients are looking for. So maybe there's a need for a change in our business style, and vice versa. I mean, I always give this example to people that sometimes uh, flexibility and well-being is taken to, in my view, little too strictly and too out of context. For instance, if it's 8 p.m., I am having a dinner with my family, and my boss calls me. Okay, and I know she would not call me unless there is some urgency. Now, I will pick up that phone and I will give her those 5 minutes, and I will put the phone down. To me, that does not against my well-being. End of the day, 7-8 hours I spend on my business, and the business priorities are on my mind whether I like it or not like it. And that 5-minute call actually helped me solve that problem there and then, so that's okay. In very same manner, the next morning, 9 a.m., if I'm in an office meeting and my phone rings and my daughter is calling me from my school because she had some problem, I will also pick up that call as well. And I will answer that call because my daughter needs that 5 minutes of my time there and then when she's into trouble. And that for me cancels out. So a lot of times the idea of looking at flexibility just from an hour perspective, that if something's after 7 p.m., oh, that's a disaster to the well-being. I don't subscribe to that. Maybe others would. So this is where the balance comes in my view. That well-being has to be seen from a holistic perspective. You have priorities, business-wise, family-wise, personal priorities. You don't compromise on them, but you also do not become completely, if I say, not alienated, but you cannot also be very reactive to the fact that if my phone rings at a certain point in time, it's just completely not acceptable. Having said that, sorry, I take a little longer. Having said that, what we can do as organizations, and again, quoting PwC example as well, you can put ways to make this easier. For instance, now our emails, you can put timers on your emails. If you like to send an email on the weekend because that suits you, it doesn't suit your colleague. So don't send an email on a Sunday morning and to somebody to have a ping and then the mind go away if it's not urgent. Put a timer on it, send it for Monday morning. Similarly, when we are taking leaves, we have the blackouts now where people are prompted that XYZ is on leave. Are you sure you want to send this email out? If it's not urgent, it can hold. So things like these can be built in to a day-to-day work practice to allow people to get that time off when required. But otherwise, I think on a day-to-day basis, we have to be rational and take it from a practical approach.
Thank you, Taimur. Jo, I mean, you come from a multicultural environment, and you've seen. I mean, you've been in Sydney, which I'm home to as well. My daughters are there. And I know that there is huge difference between Sydney and Melbourne, how they work. You be in other parts of the world, like in the US, and being in the UAE. What's your take on it? What type of advice would you give? Other C-level officers, to balance, this element, because as Taimur said very correctly, there is a little bit of a tug of war between balancing, those key resource areas for who you report to, and then also your personal, your family, your children, and which is also very important. You like to comment on that?
Yeah, and I love your answer, Taimur, about what is really pragmatic as opposed to utopian. What really works for you is important. And the more and more I think about this phrase work-life balance, which I'm not sure I like because I just don't think it exists, I think is the real simple answer just doing less with less. We talk so much more. I have such an allergy to when I hear doing more with less. And I think we are burning people out with this outdated model of Taylorism and micromanaging that is unnecessary, because essentially, to your point, it's about outcomes. It's not about presenteeism. And we are now in a culture, it's not agrarian anymore. It's not like, how many sheep were sheared? Okay, I got through the 100, my work is done. We know in the kind of areas we work in, work expands to fill a vacuum. You could work 24 hours a day. There is enough work to do that. And I think, so my perspective on work-life balance is ruthless prioritization, equipping people with models, like the RICE model, for example, to do ruthless prioritization, and realizing that sometimes a no frees a space for a better yes. And there's a gender point in that as well. Sometimes it can be very hard for women to say no at work. So helping to empower people and giving them the space to say no is also important. And I think you ask an interesting point as well that had me reflecting, because I have worked from Silicon Valley to Sydney to Saudi to Singapore, all hugely different cultures. I'm originally Irish and spent a lot of time working there. So they're all very different. And we ask so many questions now about different cultures, different generations. And I think I'd love to reframe that conversation to what we have more in common than what we have, what sets us apart, especially in this region with the geopolitical crises that are ongoing, that are so sad. If we could reflect a little bit more on what we have in common and what we as humans crave together, just around respect, around certainty, around security, around people asking how we are, not what we're doing. I honestly think simple things like that could do so much more in a transformative way for our own well-being and for that of those around us.
Yeah, fantastic. And you brought this point about work burnout, and I mentioned this at the onset of the discussion around people being valued and respected, and trusted to do the job. You talked about autonomy, very hidden area. I like to dig a little bit deeper because I feel that with your Luma, credentials, I think I can favorably dig, and I know I'm going slightly beyond script on this, and
Go for it.
and I think positive mentality is a very important element of managing one's, wellness and well-being. Uh, Burnout has clearly has an effect on employee per capita productivity. Um, Disengagement rates in the UAE is at about 60% plus, according to Gallup. What's your take on burnout?
It feels slightly reckless of me to give advice, seeing as I'm someone who has really had to work at making my boundaries less permeable and who has suffered from burnout. And I think that it's so important to say burnout is not a feeling or something woo-woo. It's a clinical condition. It is now a clinical condition that is diagnosable by a medical professional. So it is real and it exists. And it has a number of symptoms associated with it, disengagement, depersonalization, etc., which of course all affect business productivity and, more importantly, personal happiness. And I think that business is especially avant-garde or more renegade approaches to HC in business are starting to understand it's not a nice to have or a think about it after, but it's actually better business. It's fundamentally better business. You're attracting better candidates when you have a strategy around well-being to prevent burnout. And it's how you retain your best people and your top talent as well. And I love the point you mentioned about a positive mindset. That's something that I have to personally work on, is a cognitive reappraisal around work. And when something seems to go wrong or deviates or is off plan, continuously pushing myself to say, what is the lesson here? What is the gift I'm being given, even though it feels really hard to see? That for me has been a little bit of an antidote, I would say, to burnout. And I feel very compelled in my life as a learning and leadership professional to always pay it forward. And I have had so many people step in when they didn't need to, because of care and kindness when I have been approaching burnout, that I feel compelled now to pay it forward. And part of that has been me being very open, especially in places where it can be taboo, as sometimes it can be in the UAE and other places, and saying, I probably wouldn't be here unless I had my coach and my therapist, and I was interacting with them very regularly. And I think being open about that and saying it's safe and it's okay not to be okay. And even our most senior leaders can also not be okay, I have been told has helped with others who have been on the path of burnout to turn back.
Fantastic advice. So pay it forward. Be vulnerable. Accept that it's not a good day for me. Give me a break. Align with your leadership. They know that sometimes you need a break to move out. Managing yourself. Taimur, we were talking about it. So Taimur, I like to shift the focus on burnout. What has worked for you? You've been. I've personally been working with you for some time, and I've seen this in action from a very positive side. So what has worked for you in managing such a vast team, across the region?
So the fact is that, as I said, it's a journey, right? So it is something that you learn on the way. And what I have learned in my journey with working with a multicultural team and different teams is putting a bit of focus and attention on having the conversations about how you are feeling, not how you are doing today.
So good.
And I think that's the whole thing on burnout. Burnout doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Burnout is not
It's
something
clinical.
which
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
get up a morning and say, oh, no.
Yeah.
It takes,
It's a continuous process.
it's a
Yeah.
process and it takes time.
Progressive.
So
Progressive.
as a manager, as a leader, as a peer, as a colleague, I think what we can do is not just predict it but sense it, and you can only sense it when you start having these conversations. So when you're having your catch-ups, when you're having your scrums, or when you're having your meetings, start with the angle of how you're feeling today. And many a times things do come out in that, because you say, how are you doing today? The typical answer is, oh, I'm good, I'm great, I'm fine, I'm excellent. But when you go a bit deeper and saying, okay, what if somebody feeling not good today, then you go into, okay, what's making you feel like that? And then they open up and they talk about. So I think one thing is talking to people and opening up. Absolutely. Second is providing the tools. I mean, a lot of researches and surveys are out there. I think one of the PwC surveys as well suggests that it's 68% more likely that people will go and take help, professional help, if you make it available to them. So whether they are therapists, whether they are, consultants, we have an employee assistance program. Programs like these are really helpful because that gives the employees a safe space to go and talk. And the fact is, and I can speak from my culture. I mean, I've been on the east side of the world more so. I think sometimes, as Joe said, a lot of these things are a taboo. You don't want to talk about them, and you brush it under the carpet, saying, that's okay, that's all right. Statements which I don't subscribe to, like man up. You will do it. No, it is not like that. So you need to be able to give people that safe space whereby you are allowing them to open up, be vulnerable, and get professional help. Because another mistake sometimes I have done that is that I've felt that I can have the solution for everything. No, I can't. I'm not an expert in mental health necessarily. Yes, I'm a certified MHFA, but that doesn't make me as good to handle all questions. So I should be in a position to pick up what's happening with my colleague or my peer and put them in touch with the specialist, which are the therapists who can help them in that space. I think this for me has been one of the factors whereby trying to get to the burnout stage before the burnout happens, talk more to your people, and get the professional help.
Great. So, I was looking at the podcast and, breaking my head on how do I get, senior leadership, to bring it all together for people who are just getting into these areas of focus. So, I want to move to a more action-oriented set now because, uh, intention is not strategy. Intention is everybody feels good about it and you go back home and you forget about it. I'm moving to trying to figure out, and there is, as you said very correctly, Joe, one side doesn't fit all. You can't take a cookie cutter approach to this, right? You have to take a different approach to dealing with it, and it's a real problem. So three core areas which is coming out of benchmarking research in managing workplace well-being is training on emotional mindfulness skills. Two is in terms of building a culture, the DNA within. It's just not having a well-being leader or a chief well-being officer, optically having that person and not actually working out. So a culture of building trust, as you said very correctly, genuine trust and vulnerability. And third is in terms of your flexible work culture. I know some companies are at the front end of it, some companies are experimenting with it, some companies are going back and saying, come back to work all 5 days. I mean, there can be different opinions on this. I totally respect that. But Tam, I'd like to start with you on this. What advice would you give from your PwC perspective? Your experience with the people part. What are the three things that you might give an organization starting out with a workplace well-being strategy to focus on?
Okay, I think it's similar to what you said, Failan. I think first thing is, so what is culture? Culture for me, in terms of well-being, starts from the top. And I do believe that if the leaders demonstrate or they walk the talk and they follow the principles they're holding as part of their culture, that very soon gets trickled down to the team, and it becomes your culture. So if I'm talking about well-being, I need to demonstrate that I am also doing the same things as what I'm talking about, which means if it's about flexibility, I am demonstrating flexibility. If it's about care, it's about nurture, it's about empathy, I am demonstrating that that is only when the team will do it, and then it becomes a culture or the norm of the organization. So I think one thing which is very critical is that it starts from the top. I believe that, at least, that for setting up the tone and the culture, it is generally from the top. We cannot expect that it will be bottom up. That's one. I think the second thing is, you touched upon upskilling. I think, again, coming from the business that we do and our values, I think upskilling is very critical, and that's where organizations should spend more time and money on upskilling people about well-being in a culture, because these are things which we're ready to spend money on an IFRS update or a technical training, or we're ready to spend money on a leadership succession planning. That's fantastic. But at the same time, organizations, in my view, need to make a conscious effort in spend and getting specialists to help evolve their well-being culture around their organizations, because that is also something which happens over time. It's not a 2-day program that you attend and you suddenly come out of and say, oh, now I know everything about it. It takes a change management approach. It takes a lot of time, and I do know a lot of senior members or organization staff who are actually struggling with it. They're struggling with it because there has been a change. You now talk to a Gen Z employee, the way they think about work is very different than what the people who set up the core values or the people who set up the core principles of the organization thought it was 20 years, 15 years ago. So in that respect, there is a bit of a overall that is required, and that overall will not just be done by a person or two people. It has to be done in a more educated manner. So for me, upskilling, learning about what's working, learning about the science behind how people operate and behave is very critical. So that's, for me, is a very important thing that organizations should look into it. And I think lastly, it's about and this is more about UAE specifically, and you used the word tokenization earlier. Now, I have a slightly different view on that tokenization, right? And I subscribe to the fact that we shouldn't be doing it just for ticking boxes. However, I also do believe that when there's so much wrong that has happened, in order to correct it, you will need to make certain bulldozer kind of approaches. So I'll take one as an example around diversity and inclusion, and especially in our region, the shift between the female and male employee balance. And historically, it has always been very skewed because there had been a lot lesser female staff, not just PwC, across the world as well. So it won't fix overnight, and we know the reasons behind it, whether it's cultural reasons, political reasons, whatever, our own inhibitions, whatever had caused, and I am saying ours, it means generations before us. Now, if we want to address it, and if we let it be addressed on its own, it's going to take another 100 years to get there. So I do feel that we need to make a conscious effort that we do employ, let's say, more females in certain organizations so that the balance becomes equal sooner. Now, that's how I see it. So if we are looking at things which we are trying to turn and make a difference, I do feel sometimes we have to take that approach whereby we need to correct the wrongs. I'm not saying by another wrong, but I do say it might not go down well somebody, but you have to make those decisions that we want to make this correct.
Yeah, so maybe a KPI on the budget, per capita spend on well-being, or wellness of your employees, besides the insurance and gym membership and stuff like
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, so valid points in terms of the overall leadership, action signals and words, as Joe, you said very correctly. Joe, I want to draw from your overall 20-year experience in, you work with the World Economic Forum, if I'm right in saying so, as well, and you are contributing to, uplifting communities and, in your own little way while, building strength in your organization. What are your thoughts on it? Any radical areas that you would want to advise us on? If you're running a master class for C-level officers on well-being, how would you get about it?
So I was listening to Taimur as you were speaking, and I was thinking, how refreshing is it that we have spoken for quite some time now, and I don't think one of us has mentioned AI.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is beautiful. This is the first conversation I have had maybe in 2 years where I haven't mentioned AI, so I almost didn't want to drop it in.
Yeah.
But I might have to violate that. But the opportunity it's presenting us with now to learn in the flow of life, really, I think is going to be incredible for supporting our well-being. If we think about sometimes trying to access learning, trying to access what we should do from a well-being perspective, it can be really hard to source information and material. But now you're getting things like Microsoft Viva and these other micro-learning or nudge tools that can actually pick up signals from the way that you're interacting with one of your communications channels to actually push well-being to you when you need it in the flow of work, in that way that employees crave, because they have liquid expectations. They now expect to access training the way that they expect to have an interaction at the Apple Store or Amazon, quickly, on their terms, 2 clicks, 10 seconds. And I think that's where I see real promise. And I would, going into those tools, procuring them for organizations and enabling people to use them is important. But I also think on the flip side of the AI quagmire is there is a hubris around AI. It's amazing the people I talk to that know exactly where AI is going. They know exactly what's going to happen next. And I think, wow, more power to you. I really have no clue. And it may be because I've struggled to still switch the remote on for my TV. But I think outside of this, when we don't really know where the future is going, things are very unpredictable. We're in a VUCA or a BANI world of uncertainty. Training on how to have resilience, how to cope with white swan or black swan events, how to be able to thrive in uncertainty, learning about change management in a dynamic way. So not some of these older models around unfreeze and refreeze, but really how does change happen in the dynamic era, and equipping yourself to be able to reappraise change as something not just good, but something that maintains your relevance and that you actively chase, even when things are going reasonably well. I think that's where we need to skill people a little bit, because it's when you see change as something to be pursued that I think can help a little bit with burnout and getting a little bit out of this victim mindset that can pervade us all.
Fantastic. I mean, I can run this a little bit longer, but I mean, you are. I mean, I don't want to take the last question because I think it's already been answered. As change champions, I mean, your mindsets are very diverse. In your own areas of work, but it nevertheless brings a lot of context into what we're talking about. It well-being is a real problem, and it affects employee productivity, per capita contribution, and as you said, very affects your EVP, your employee value proposition. And you might not even find people wanting to join your business because you don't have a meaningful well-being approach. So make people feel valued, trusted, and respected, and that's what is coming out. And I wish the two of you all the very best in driving the new agenda for happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you so much for joining us and the CIPD. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for
Failan.
having
Thanks.
us.